Welcome to our deep dive into Genesis 32:22 to 32.
Okay.
Now, you're
Hmm.
probably already pretty familiar with Jacob's wrestling match,
Right.
especially if you're prepping sermons or leading Bible study.
Mm-hmm.
But let's face it, even the most well-known stories can feel a little stale after a while, right?
Absolutely. And it's a challenge that a lot of pastors face,
Yeah,
finding fresh perspectives and illustrations to bring these ancient texts to life for their congregations.
exactly. So we've been exploring some sermons on this passage.
Right.
And what's really striking is how creative some pastors have gotten.
Yeah.
We're not talking about your typical struggle with God interpretations.
Right.
These sermons are using pop culture references,
Mm-hmm.
historical parallels, even sports analogies to shed new light on Jacob's encounter.
It's really refreshing to see how pastors are finding new ways to engage their audiences and make these stories feel relevant.
For sure. So one theme that jumped out at me was how many sermons focused on Jacob's transformation.
Yeah.
It's more than just the name change, isn't it?
Yeah, several pastors use this to highlight the idea that God sees our potential, not just our past mistakes.
Right.
One sermon even used the analogy of a sculptor chipping away at a rough stone to reveal the beautiful statue hidden within.
Okay.
It's a powerful image of how God works in our lives.
Yeah, I like that it goes beyond that generic God sees your potential message
Right.
and gives it a more concrete image for people to latch onto.
Exactly. Another fascinating interpretation came from a church that linked Jacob's name change to the concept of spiritual warfare.
Okay.
They argued that the name Israel doesn't just mean he struggles with God,
Right.
but also he prevails with God.
Hmm.
It's not just about the struggle itself, but about the victory that comes through perseverance.
Okay, so it's not just about enduring hardship, but about becoming stronger through it.
Yeah.
Almost like those intense workout regimens that leave you sore,
Right.
but ultimately build muscle.
That's a great analogy, and it ties into another theme we saw.
Okay.
The idea that wrestling with God isn't about winning a fight. It's about submitting to his will.
Right. It's not about overpowering God. It's about surrendering to him.
Mm-hmm.
But some of these sermons found really unique ways to convey that.
Yeah.
Hebron Baptist Church, for example, used a WWE analogy that completely caught me off guard.
I remember that one.
They compared God to a wrestling coach pushing Jacob to his limits.
Right.
Not to break him, but to train him to make him stronger.
Yeah, and they pointed out how wrestlers willingly submit to their coach's grueling training regimens because they know it's for their benefit.
Exactly.
It's a powerful way to reframe that idea of surrender, isn't it?
It certainly is. It takes it from a passive concept
Mhm.
to an active choice, a deliberate act of submitting to a higher authority for a greater purpose.
And speaking of surrender, another church used a visual that really stuck with me.
Okay.
They talked about a child thinking they're steering the car while sitting on their grandpa's lap.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a humorous way to illustrate how we often think we're in control,
Right.
but ultimately we're not.
It really drives home the point that true surrender involves acknowledging our limitations
Yeah.
and trusting in a power greater than ourselves.
And that's a message that resonates deeply, not just with people of faith,
Yeah.
but with anyone who's ever struggled with the need to control everything in their lives.
So we've got transformation, surrender. It seems like humility is a key ingredient in all of this.
Yes.
And one church mission way actually took a pretty bold stance, suggesting that Jacob might have been wrestling with a pre-incarnate Jesus.
Wow, that was definitely one of the more provocative interpretations we came across.
Yeah.
And they didn't shy away from the theological implications of that idea.
Oh, really?
They connected it to the concept of kenosis, the self-emptying of Christ,
Okay.
to highlight the radical humility involved in God's relationship with humanity.
That's deep, and it adds a whole new layer of meaning to the wrestling match, doesn't it?
It does.
It becomes less about Jacob's individual struggle and more about a cosmic dance between humanity and divinity.
Precisely. And it raises some intriguing questions about the nature of the Trinity
Yeah.
and how God interacts with us on a personal level.
But even beyond the theological implications, it emphasizes the point that true humility involves recognizing our dependence on God, our need for his grace.
Exactly. And that's a message that can really challenge people's assumptions,
Yeah.
especially in our culture that prizes self-reliance and independence.
It's almost counterintuitive to think that true strength comes from acknowledging our weakness.
Absolutely. And that's why these creative interpretations are so important.
So,
They help us see familiar stories in a new light,
right.
challenging our preconceived notions and leading us to a deeper understanding of our faith.
So we've got these big themes: transformation, surrender, humility. But what really stood out to me was how these pastors use specific illustrations to drive those points home.
Yeah.
I mean, we had Bison charging into storms, Dodgers fans celebrating after setbacks.
There was even a sermon that used Rocky music to underscore the intensity of Jacob's struggle.
Right. It's like they're tapping into these unexpected connections that make ancient concepts suddenly feel relevant and relatable to our modern lives.
It's a brilliant strategy. It's about finding those aha moments that bridge the gap between the ancient world and the modern listener.
And those moments are what make these stories stick with people.
Yes.
Prompting them to think about their own lives and their own relationship with God.
Absolutely.
It's like these pastors are saying, hey, you might think you know this story.
Right.
But let me show you a different angle, a new way to connect with it.
And it's not just about entertainment value.
Right.
These unexpected connections can actually deepen our understanding of the text.
Yeah.
Take that Rocky music example on the surface. It might seem like a gimmick.
Okay.
But if you think about it, the music evokes themes of perseverance, resilience, and overcoming obstacles, which are all central to Jacob's story.
Right. It's not just about finding a catchy tune.
Right.
It's about finding a way to tap into those deeper emotions and connect them to the message of the passage.
Exactly. Another example that stood out to me was a sermon that used the analogy of a bison charging into a storm.
Okay.
The pastor was talking about how we often try to avoid our problems, but sometimes the best way to overcome them is to confront them head on, like a bison facing a blizzard.
Now, that's an image that's hard to forget.
Right.
And it ties into that idea of surrender we were talking about earlier, doesn't it?
It does.
It's about acknowledging that sometimes we need to let go of control and trust that God will guide us through the storm.
Precisely. And it also connects to the theme of transformation.
Okay.
Just like that bison emerges from the storm stronger and more resilient, we too can emerge from our struggles transformed by the experience.
Okay, so we've talked about the wrestling match itself.
Right.
But one thing that stood out to me in these sermons was how many of them focused on the aftermath. Jacob walks away with a new name, a new identity.
Yes.
But he's also got a limp. He's forever marked by that encounter.
And that limp became a powerful symbol in several sermons. One pastor described it as a badge of honor, a reminder of the struggle that led to transformation.
Okay.
Another interpreted it as a sign of Jacob's vulnerability, a constant reminder of his dependence on God.
I'm struck by the contrast there. On one hand, it's a symbol of strength,
Yeah.
a testament to the fact that Jacob went through a difficult experience and came out on the other side. But on the other hand, it's a symbol of weakness, a reminder that he's not invincible and still needs God's grace.
And that duality is what makes the image so compelling.
Yeah.
It speaks to the complex nature of our relationship with God. We're
Yeah.
called to be strong and courageous, but also to recognize our limitations and surrender to his will.
It's like that limp is a constant reminder that we can't do it on our own.
Yes.
We need God's help every step of the way.
And it also speaks to the lasting impact of our encounters with God. Even after the wrestling match is over, the experience stays with us, shaping our perspective and influencing our choices.
So it's not just about a single moment of transformation.
Right.
It's about the ongoing process of sanctification, of becoming more like Christ over time.
Exactly. And those scars, those reminders of our struggles, can actually be sources of strength and encouragement along the way.
Okay.
They remind us that we've faced challenges before and come through them, and that God is always with us, even in the midst of difficulty.
You know, it's interesting how many of these sermons used Jacob's story as a model for spiritual growth.
Yeah.
But they also emphasize that it's not a linear process.
Right.
It's not like we have one big wrestling match with God and then we're done.
Exactly.
It's more like a series of matches, a constant back and forth between our will and his will.
Absolutely. And just like Jacob walked away with a limp, we too will likely carry scars from our own spiritual battles.
Yeah.
But those scars don't have to define us.
Right.
They can be reminders of God's faithfulness and our own resilience.
It's a message of hope, isn't it?
It is.
That even when we stumble and fall, even when we're marked by our struggles, God is still there, ready to pick us up and guide us forward.
It is a message of hope. And it's a message that resonates deeply with people who are going through their own difficult seasons.
Yeah.
It reminds them that they're not alone in their struggles.
Right.
And that God is using those experiences to shape them into the people he created them to be.
And you know, one thing that struck me as we were reviewing these sermons was how many of them highlighted the importance of community in this process of spiritual growth.
Yeah.
It's not something we're meant to do alone.
That's a crucial point, and it's something that's often overlooked in our individualistic culture.
Yeah.
We tend to view spirituality as a solitary pursuit, but the Bible clearly teaches that we need each other.
Right.
We need the support, encouragement, and accountability of others to help us navigate the challenges of faith.
One sermon used the analogy of a hiking group navigating a difficult trail.
Okay.
Each person has their own strengths and weaknesses, but by working together, they can encourage each other, share the load, and celebrate the victories together.
I love that analogy. It captures the essence of Christian community. It's about recognizing that we're all on this journey together and that we need each other's help to reach the destination.
And it also ties into the idea of surrender we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Sometimes surrendering to God's will involves surrendering to the support and guidance of others.
Right.
It's about letting go of our pride and admitting that we need help.
And that can be a difficult thing to do, especially for those of us who are used to being independent and self-sufficient.
Yeah.
But it's in those moments of vulnerability that we truly experience the power of Christian community.
It's about recognizing that we're not meant to go it alone. We need each other to help us carry our burdens, to celebrate our victories, and to point us back to God when we stray.
And it's in that context of community that true transformation can occur. It's where we learn to love and serve one another, to forgive and be forgiven, and to grow in grace and humility.
So it seems like this wrestling match isn't just about Jacob's individual struggle.
Right.
It's a metaphor for the journey of faith that we're all on.
Right.
It's a journey that involves surrender, transformation, and the constant reliance on God's grace.
Yes.
And it's a journey we're not meant to take alone.
Well said. And as we continue to explore these sermons, I'm curious to see what other insights and interpretations we uncover.
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn from these ancient texts, especially when we're willing to look at them from different angles and engage with them on a deeper level.
I agree. There's a richness and depth to these stories that we can keep unpacking for a lifetime. You know, as we've been discussing these different sermon interpretations, one thing that's really struck me is how these pastors are finding ways to connect this ancient story,
Right.
the specific needs and challenges of their congregations.
That's a key aspect of effective preaching, isn't it?
Right.
It's not just about delivering a generic message. It's about understanding your audience and finding ways to make the text resonate with their lived experiences.
Right. For example, one pastor in a rural community used Jacob's wrestling match to address the anxieties and uncertainties that many farmers were facing due to drought and economic hardship.
He compared Jacob's struggle to the feeling of being caught in a relentless cycle of hard work and setbacks with no guarantee of success.
Exactly. And he used that analogy to encourage his congregation to persevere in their faith even when things felt hopeless. He reminded them that just as Jacob emerged from his struggle with a new name and a new sense of purpose,
Right.
they too could find strength and resilience through their trials.
Another sermon that stood out to me was one that addressed the issue of racial injustice.
Good.
The pastor drew parallels between Jacob's struggle for recognition and the ongoing fight for equality and justice in our society.
He talked about how Jacob had to wrestle with societal norms and prejudices in order to claim his rightful place as the heir to God's promises.
And he used that analogy to challenge his congregation to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, and to persevere in the fight for justice and equality for all.
It's amazing how this one story can be applied to such a wide range of issues and challenges.
Yeah.
It speaks to the timeless relevance of Scripture, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and it's a testament to the creativity and insight of these pastors who are finding new ways to make these ancient texts speak to the needs of their congregations.
You know, we've talked a lot about the different interpretations and illustrations that these pastors are using, but I'm also curious about the impact these sermons are having on their listeners.
Okay.
Are they sparking conversations? Are they leading to personal transformation?
That's a great question, and from what we've gathered, it seems like these sermons are resonating deeply with people.
Okay.
Many pastors have reported that their congregations are engaging with the text in new ways and having more meaningful conversations about faith and spirituality.
One pastor showed that after his sermon on Jacob's limp as a symbol of resilience,
Okay.
several members of his congregation who were struggling with chronic illness or disability approached him to express how much the message had encouraged them.
They said it helped them reframe their perspective on their struggles and to see their weaknesses as opportunities for God's strength to shine through.
Another pastor reported that his sermon on Jacob's name change sparked a conversation about identity and purpose within his youth group.
Oh, wow.
The teenagers were fascinated by the idea that God sees us not just for who we are now, but for who we can become.
That's great.
They started asking questions about their own callings and how they could use their unique gifts and talents to make a difference in the world.
It's inspiring to see how these sermons are not just delivering information, but also empowering people to live out their faith in practical ways.
It's a reminder that preaching isn't just about standing in a pulpit and delivering a monologue.
Right.
It's about engaging with people's hearts and minds, sparking their imaginations, and challenging them to grow in their relationship with God.
And it's about equipping them to live out their faith in their everyday lives, making a difference in their families, their communities, and the world around them.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis 32, 22 to 32, I'm struck by the sheer variety of interpretations and applications that we've encountered.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that Scripture is a living text
it is.
that can speak to us in countless ways,
Right.
depending on our own unique contexts and experiences.
It's not a static set of rules or doctrines,
Right.
but a dynamic conversation between God and humanity. A conversation that continues to unfold throughout history and in our own individual lives.
And that's what makes studying the Bible so rewarding.
Yeah.
It's not about finding all the answers or arriving at a definitive interpretation.
Right.
It's about engaging with the text, wrestling with the questions it raises, and allowing it to challenge and transform us.
And it's about sharing those insights and discoveries with others, sparking conversations and encouraging one another on the journey of faith.
So as you go back to your own sermons and Bible studies, we encourage you to take a fresh look at Genesis 32, 22 to 32.
Absolutely.
Don't be afraid to experiment with new interpretations, to draw unexpected connections, and to challenge your listeners to engage with the text in new ways.
Right.
You might be surprised by the insights you uncover and the impact your message can have.
After all, this ancient story of Jacob wrestling with God continues to speak to us today,
Yeah.
offering guidance, encouragement, and hope for the journey ahead.